Did you know a child star who once charmed America was found sitting beside his murdered wife on a dark Los Angeles street and walked free anyway? The bullet that killed Bonnie Lee Bakley was fired just steps from a restaurant where the two had eaten dinner. He said he went back inside for a gun he'd left at the table. 5 months, married. One night that ended everything. Why does this story still haunt true crime obsessives more than 2 decades later? Because the man at the center wasn't a stranger. He was Robert Blake, beloved as a kid in the Our Gang shorts, then famous as TV detective Tony Barretta. The victim was Bonnie Lee Bakley, a woman with a history that made her own murder almost impossible to solve. There's a twist here almost no one is talking about. Let's go back to the beginning. Robert Blake was born Michael Gubitosi in 1933, pushed on to film sets as a small child by parents who treated him like a paycheck. By the time he was a household name, he carried decades of damage with him. What this means for you is simple. Fame, this early, rarely heals anyone. It bends them. Then came Bonnie Lee Bakley. According to all that's interesting, Bakley ran a mail-order operation, selling photos and the promise of romance to lonely men who sent her cash. She was drawn to celebrities. She pursued them relentlessly. When she became pregnant, she initially wasn't certain whether the father was Robert Blake or Christian Brando, son of Marlon Brando. A paternity test confirmed Blake. He married her in 2000, reportedly out of obligation, rather than love. A like on this does more than you'd think to get it seen. So if this is pulling you in, tap it now. Their marriage was cold and suspicious from the start. Blake kept Bakley in a guest house behind his home, watched her, distrusted her. And then, on the night of May 4th, 2001, that distrust collided with a gunshot. This next part changes the whole picture. Here is what the prosecution believed happened. Blake and Bakley dined at Vitello's, an Italian restaurant in Studio City. They walked to his car, parked on a quiet side street around the corner. Blake claimed he realized he'd left his handgun, a legal weapon he carried for protection, back at the restaurant. He says he returned to retrieve it. When he came back to the car, Bakley had been shot in the head. But the weapon that killed her wasn't his gun. It was an older pistol, found discarded in a dumpster nearby. And that's where the villain framing gets complicated. Because prosecutors pointed straight at Blake, alleging he'd tried to hire stuntmen to kill his wife before doing it himself. 2 former Hollywood stuntmen testified that Blake had approached them, asking them to pop Bakley, to snuff her. Their words under oath. Think about what that means for a jury. 2 men, claiming a TV star, asked them to commit murder. It should have been damning. But both witnesses had used drugs heavily, and their credibility crumbled under cross-examination. The defense painted them as unreliable, possibly delusional. The victim herself, Bonnie Lee Bakley, became a kind of second defendant. Her scams, her lies, her long list of men who might have wanted her gone. The last piece is the one that reframes everything. Because in a courtroom, the question wasn't only did Blake do it, it was, can you prove it beyond a doubt? And the physical evidence simply wasn't there. No gunshot residue conclusively tied him, no murder weapon traced to his hand. The case rested on motive and on 2 witnesses nobody fully trusted. On March 16, 2005, the jury delivered its verdict, not guilty. Robert Blake walked out of that courtroom a free man, acquitted of murdering his wife. The criminal system had spoken. And here's the most surprising insight of all. The story didn't end there. Buckley's family refused to accept it. They filed a civil lawsuit where the standard of proof is far lower. You don't need certainty. You need a preponderance of evidence. And in November 2005, that civil jury reached the opposite conclusion. They found Robert Blake liable for Bonnie Lee Buckley's death and ordered him to pay $30 million in damages. Two juries. The same man, the same killing, two completely different answers. Criminally innocent, civilly responsible. Blake later filed for bankruptcy. The judgment eventually reduced. Here is my prediction. This case will be taught in law schools for another 50 years as the cleanest example of how American justice can render two opposite verdicts on one death and have both be technically correct. He died in March 2023 at the age of 89. The question of what truly happened on that street still unresolved. Before I go, here is your historical footnote of the day. This matters because Blake wasn't the first acquitted celebrity haunted by a civil judgment. There's a darker pattern in Hollywood's relationship with justice. In 1921, silent film comedian Roscoe "Fatty" Arbuckle, one of the highest-paid stars in the world, was charged in the death of a young actress named Virginia Rapp after a wild party. He endured 3 criminal trials. The third jury didn't just acquit him, they wrote a formal letter of apology, declaring a grave injustice had been done, and yet Arbuckle's career was destroyed anyway. The accusation alone ended him. Innocence in a courtroom meant nothing against the verdict of public rumor. The man died, broke and forgotten a decade later. That is your footnote for today. So here's what I want from you. That split verdict, guilty in one court, innocent in another, does it mean the system worked or that it failed twice? Tell me below. Subscribe to Weird History, and I'll see you tomorrow with the next one.